This video is brought to you by Brilliant. The Chinese economy is in a tough spot at the moment. Domestic demand is weak, private debt levels are rising, and a Trump trade war is looming. However, one of the underappreciated issues facing the Chinese economy relates to its pension system, which was already struggling with China's aging population, but is now coming under renewed pressure thanks to both the recent economic slowdown and the fact that more and more young workers are boycotting it. So in this video, we're going to look at China's pension system, why it's under pressure, and whether it can be fixed. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's start by explaining China's pension system. When Chinese officials talk about the country's pension system, they usually say it's got 3 pillars. 2 of these 3 pillars, however, are pretty small. There's what's known as the enterprise annuity system, which was introduced in 2004 and is basically a system for private sector employees where they can pay in a bit of their salary each month and then enjoy certain tax benefits. And then there's a personal pension scheme which was introduced in 2022 and which allows anyone to put up to 12,000 yuan a year into a tax-free account, a bit like a 401k in the US or a lifetime ISA in the UK. Neither of these schemes are all that popular. Only about 30 million people, representing less than 5% of the working population, are signed up to the enterprise annuity system, and a similar number are signed up to the private pension system, although that number is expected to grow in the coming years. By far and away, the biggest of the 3 pillars in the Chinese pension system is a public and mandatory program known as the Old Age Insurance System, which covers over 1 billion people. It's made up of a basic plan for the jobless in rural and urban areas, covering more than 550 million people, and an employment-based plan for civil servants and people working in certain state-owned enterprises that covers another 500 million employees. Unfortunately for the CCP, there are 2 big problems with this scheme. The first is that, in the eyes of many Chinese workers, it's unfair, and it exacerbates various divides within Chinese society. For instance, because the specifics of the scheme are left up to provincial governments, pensioners in wealthier provinces generally enjoy better benefits than those in poorer areas. This problem is exacerbated by China's hukou system, which basically means that, even if workers move to a wealthier city or province, their pension benefits are still tied to their original home city. The hukou system also differentiates between urban and rural workers, and rural workers generally receive far lower pensions than urban workers, exacerbating China's pre-existing urban-rural divide. The current system also exacerbates a generational divide, because older people, and especially those who worked for the government or big state-owned enterprises, generally get the most generous pensions. This is largely because, until the 90s, China used to have a supremely generous pension system for civil servants, where they enjoyed nearly full salary pensions once they retired as part of the so-called iron rice bowl system, without contributing any of their salary during their working years. While China began moving to a contributory pension system in 1997, many government agencies and state-owned enterprises continued to provide very generous pension systems, which means there's now a class of retirees who receive pensions far more generous than anything that young Chinese workers can expect in the future. But as well as being unfair, the other big problem with the current system is that it's unaffordable. Now, China isn't alone in this respect, and many countries with aging populations are going to struggle to afford their pension obligations in the future. The severity of this problem becomes apparent if you look at individual countries' so-called public sector net worth. For context, public sector net worth is basically a very comprehensive way of measuring the sustainability of a country's public finances that looks at not just its explicit debts, but also its assets, like any land or equities that it owns, and its other liabilities, including pensions. The IMF has been calling for countries to start using public sector net worth instead of debt to GDP for a while now, and one of the big reasons is that it takes into account pension obligations, which can account for as much as 100% of GDP. Nonetheless, China is in a particularly difficult spot for a couple of reasons. First, China is suffering through one of the worst demographic crises in the world. While many countries are struggling with fertility rates below the replacement rate of 2.1, China's is particularly low, in large part thanks to the legacy of China's one-child policy. In 2022, for instance, state media reported that China's fertility rate had fallen to a record low of 1.09, which would be one of the lowest in the world. This is why China's old age dependency ratio, which measures the number of pensioners relative to the working age population, is expected to fall dramatically in the coming years. In 1980, China had 11 workers aged 20 to 64 for every person aged 65 or older. But that ratio has now dropped to 4.3 and is projected to fall to about 1.5 by 2050. Second, demographic crises usually afflict countries in the later stages of economic development. While it's easy to forget, China isn't actually yet a developed economy. It has a GDP per capita of under $15,000, on par with much of South America and below most middling European countries. This means that China will have to deal with its demographic crisis and the associated pressure on its pension system with less cash than most other aging societies. Third, Chinese workers generally retire pretty early. China's retirement age is just 60, having been set in 1955 when the country's median age was 21, and only 7% of its population was older than 60. While the CCP did announce a plan to increase the retirement age to 63 late last year, this is still pretty low for a country with a life expectancy of nearly 80, and because many Chinese workers choose to work hard and retire early, and the average retirement age at the moment is even lower, at just 54. All this is why the National Social Security Fund, or NSSF, which was established in 2000 to finance China's future pension obligations, is currently forecast to run dry by 2035. And this might happen even earlier as well, because young Chinese workers have stopped contributing to pension schemes, both because they don't feel they've got spare cash to invest into a pension scheme, and because they doubt they'll ever actually see their pension. So, what's the solution here? Well, without steep increases in productivity, fertility, or immigration, all of which currently seem unlikely, the only available solutions to the CCP will be further increases to the retirement age or less generous pensions. We've seen how politically controversial these sorts of policies can be in Europe, and it'll be interesting to see how they go down in China. There's a lot of difficult decisions necessary here, and making huge decisions, especially quickly, is difficult, even for world leaders. The good thing is that Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data, programming, and AI. Their interactive classes help build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorizing. So while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you'll also be becoming a better thinker. For instance, their Predicting with Probability course can help you better understand and assess the world around you. You can learn to wrangle massive datasets, compare distributions, and master fundamental concepts like Bayes' theorem. That might sound a little technical, but with their active learning, you learn this by answering questions like which airline is least likely to have a delay due to weather, and how much more unruly airline passengers have gotten since the pandemic. Data skills are absolutely necessary for navigating the modern world, and Brilliant is the best way to get them. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, or click the link in the description. And by doing so, you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.